Yeah, I was kind of a last minute addition to this. I don't really write. My grandfather was a writer. I like to read stuff and talk and things like that. I think maybe that's why I was considered for doing this. So I figured it would be kind of a good thing to do is read some of his things and kind of give it like a little bit of a framing. Um, this book of my grandfather's, My Life on the Mississippi, or Why I Am Not Mark Twain, is probably as close to an autobiography as he ever got. He wrote it in the early 70s, shortly before he passed away. The pieces I'm going to write or read have to do with the period right after he married my grandmother in 1938. At that time, the lock and dam at Eagle Point was nearly finished but not operative. The river above the dam now wound its age-old course through a stricken bottomland wilderness of stumps. The trees had all been cut by the Corps of Engineers contractors to provide, when the dam was closed, miles and miles of underwater stump fields to snatch the bottoms out of flatboats and bend propellers into artistic, non-propulsive shapes. Ecology had not become popular then. John Penner was still trying to sell his duck, and we were innocent. Today, any suggestion of such wholesale devastation would be greeted with widespread air pollution in the form of ecology screams, and there would be no 9-foot channel on the upper Mississippi. Up into this graveyard of trees, we blundered in our rowboat, and we found 2 very large floating cottonwood logs left behind by the Corps of Engineers and their handy helpers. We tied them up to a stump and went home to the cave, for it was growing dark. "What are we going to do with those big logs?" she asked me. "I guess we'd better make a raft," I said. Finding boards and such was no problem on the islands then. All I took was a hammer and a saw and some nails on a Saturday morning, and by noon we had a pretty fine raft. Meanwhile, she had been scouring around amid the ruins of a former riverside cottage, and she brought back 2 rocking chairs for raft furniture. We set up a jack staff with a rag tied onto it. We made a sweep out of an old washboard nailed to a pole. We also, of course, had the rowboat and the oars. We turned loose. We worked her out into the stream. A raft on a lake or a pond is fun, but it's work making it go anyplace. A rafting on a river is all pleasure, all funny. You just do nothing and the town begins to move past, and pretty soon Illinois and Wisconsin are both moving like a panorama. It's a free ride, and people in boats come along and lay alongside, and they say, "What are you people doing sitting on them rocking chairs in the middle of a river?" First off, we went through the open lock chamber of Lock 11, mile 583. This was a historic passage for both of us and the lock. It was the first time we'd ever been through a wide open lock chamber on rocking chairs, and it was the first and last raft ever to go through lock number 11 on the 9-foot channel project. "Now I've seen everything," is what the government idlers standing around would have said, except this tedious expression had not been invented. Instead, they said, "Christ, he's got a Jane with him, and they're sitting on rocking chairs." From here, my grandfather's love of the river turned into their mutual love of the river. It wasn't long before makeshift rafts weren't good enough. Bill Burden had a houseboat. That may have started it. I mean, our houseboat fever. We had a nifty houseboat. He had a nifty houseboat with a screen porch and a wonderful kitchen and a McDonald force pump on deck to pump water into the tank on the roof. There was a plop into the river toilet and a little gem wood stove in the main cabin and Aladdin mantle lamps. It was just about as snug as you could imagine. This was the first houseboat my child bride had ever seen, and it was the first one I'd ever been aboard that was not in a shantyboat class. This one had a design for living, designed by the boat and boiler works and living provided by the occupants. Let me tell you that everything you do is more fun on a houseboat, even washing dishes. Pumping water is a party, and stoking the fire, sweeping the deck, trimming the lamps are a lark when you can look out the parlor window and see a piece of driftwood floating by with a bird riding on it. So Bill and Lizzie used the houseboat for weekends and other holidays, and Bill was a chef and fed me my first coon, which coincided with my last roast coon. But oh, how we loved that houseboat, hardly anyone will ever know. The luxury houseboat boom is on now, but the old Pampoo remains perfect in my memory. Every rivery thing about it was simple and natural and gadget-free and right. The only houseboat that comes near is my brother Mycroft's 3-room Hernando's, which he built with his bare hands and has gas lights. Duncan Glab has a nifty Keene houseboat with a very entertaining electric generator, but he decided to go straight, quit the river, and join the golf club, the equivalent of Captain Ahab's abandoning the quest for the white whale and taking up with the Nantucket Croquet Association. Tom Roshek's houseboat, the Ark, was like a summer cottage afloat on a flood, but it sank. Danny Fetgetter's houseboat was the biggest and most baroque, but he hauled it ashore at Massey Station and jacked it up, and it isn't a houseboat anymore. Freddie Bissell built the only houseboat ever known to be the size of a telephone booth. So how to get a houseboat? A houseboat we could really live on full time, forsaking the land utterly and floating all day and all night in watery bliss together with the wedding presents, the bull terrier, and the upright piano. Months went by. There just weren't any houseboats to be had, that's all. Except one day there was one. It was advertised in the Waterways Journal, and it was located at La Crosse, Wisconsin, 120 miles upriver. So we climbed into my 1935 Ford convertible sedan, which Mycroft called the trellis because of the exposed top bows and fragments of tattered canvas formerly the top. Listen, on $22.50 a week, you can't buy new custom-made canvas auto tops. And we drove to La Crosse and saw George Nealter, who was living in a nice, warm, cozy houseboat right below the railroad bridge. He rowed us across the river, and there, stranded on the island among the bare, wintry trees, was the former Corps of Engineers quarter boat, number 237, looking for all the world like a framed country hotel transplanted to a barge. 2 stories high with a gable roof, overhanging Swiss balconies at each end. With 40 12-light windows, it was an awesome sight. It was also sunk. The front door was open, and the current, nearly up to the doorknob, was entering enthusiastically and rushing through the house and out the back door 60 feet away. Yes, the barge was 80 feet long, and that's quite a barge. Well, that there leak now, that don't amount to much, George said. I'll borrow this big fire pump from the city and pump her out, and I'll lend you that there pump until we get her down to Dubuque. We paid $500 for this monstrous leaker and $100 to a fisherman who towed it to Dubuque with a flatboat, us dangling behind on a line. The only time he said he could do it was at night, and he'd never been below Lynxville, so he spent the night hunting buoys with a 5-cell flashlight while we were back on the house, keeping her afloat with that City of La Crosse fire pump. This had a 4-inch discharge and a big delivery, but even so, our new home had to be pumped every hour. It would have been the end. It was not really a fun trip, but we made it to Dubuque Harbor. Other pumps were brought into play, and daily life became a struggle to keep our $500 investment in home from slipping beneath the waves. A sunken boat is the saddest sight on earth. Thanks, guys.